A self-storage facility is the only kind of real estate I know of where the product you're actually selling isn't space. It's procrastination. You think you're renting out a metal box. What you're really renting is the right for someone to not make a decision they've been avoiding for years. And that, it turns out, is the most reliable revenue stream in real estate. Picture the version everyone pictures. A quiet row of orange roll-up doors under a clean sign. No customers milling around, no register, no smell of anything. A camera on a pole, a keypad at the gate, and a bank account that fills up on the first of the month while you're somewhere else entirely. Passive income made of corrugated steel. That's the postcard. Here's what the postcard leaves out. For the first 2 to 3 years, that quiet building isn't earning you money. It's eating it. The doors sit closed because the units sit empty, and the loan payment shows up every single month whether anyone has rented a single unit or not. The silence you were sold as passive is, for a long stretch, just the sound of your own capital burning. So this is a story with a fork in it. Some of these buildings genuinely print money, the kind of quiet, obscene margins most business owners only dream about. Some quietly bleed their owners for years, and then get sold at a loss to someone who thinks they've found a bargain. And a few of them destroy careful, competent people who did almost everything right. By the end of this, you'll know which kind you're most likely to end up buying, and why the difference has almost nothing to do with the building itself. On the outside, it looks like the simplest business in the world. 4 walls, a roof, a gate. On the inside, it's a psychology experiment with a mortgage attached. The whole model runs on a single human weakness, and the people who win are the ones who understand exactly what that weakness is worth. Moving in is easy. Moving out is the whole business. Let's start by killing a lie, the one that says self-storage is one thing. It isn't. The word covers at least 3 completely different businesses that happen to share a shape. The first is the one you're imagining. Single-story drive-up units on cheap land at the edge of town. Rows of doors you pull a truck right up to. This is the cheapest version to build, and that cheapness is the whole trap, which we'll come back to. The second is the climate-controlled box. A multi-story building, usually closer to where people actually live, with elevators, humidity control, interior hallways, and a monthly rate that can run double the drive-up unit down the highway. The third barely resembles the other two. It's an institutional-grade asset in a dense urban infill location, owned by a company with a stock ticker, run by software, priced by an algorithm that adjusts your rent while you sleep. These 3 things get lumped under one word, and that's the first place newcomers lose money, because they price the dream of the third one while buying the economics of the first one. And this is a more crowded field than the empty parking lots suggest. There are something like 52,000 of these facilities scattered across the country, more than 2 billion square feet of rentable space, and the vast majority of them are not owned by the companies with stock tickers. The big real estate investment trusts, the household names, control only around 1/5 of the market. The other 80% is mom and pop, 1 or 2 buildings owned by someone who read the same seminar slide you did. That fragmentation tells you 2 things at once. The barrier to entry is low enough that thousands of amateurs got in, and the professionals, with all their advantages, still only bothered to take 1/5. Hold on to that. It's a clue we'll cash in later. Here's the number that pulls people in. Building storage is astonishingly cheap by real estate standards. Depending on how you build, construction runs somewhere around $25 to $75 per square foot, with the plain drive-up units at the low end and the climate-controlled buildings up top. Compare that to almost any other commercial property, and it looks like a steal. That's the figure repeated at every seminar, the one that makes a spreadsheet glow. And it's true. It's also hiding 2 things standing just behind it. The first is the land. That construction number is just the building. The dirt underneath it is a separate cost, and it typically runs another 1/4 to 1/3 of the entire development budget on top. In the cheap land markets, that's manageable. In the markets where storage actually performs, where there are enough people nearby to fill the units, land is expensive precisely because everyone wants it. So the cheaper the building looks, the more the land tends to cost, and the 2 numbers quietly trade places. And whatever you borrowed to build it isn't waiting politely. The loan accrues from the day you break ground, through every month of construction, through every month of the slow fill that follows. In a low-rate world, that's a headache. In the rate environment developers have actually faced lately, it's a wound that widens on its own interest, stacking on a building that hasn't earned its first reliable dollar. Rising borrowing costs and supply chain delays have left a whole crop of newly built facilities sitting half empty with the meter running. The cheap building was never the whole bill. The expensive part was always going to be the waiting, and the waiting is financed. The second hidden cost isn't a line item at all. It's time. You've built the box. Now you have to fill it, and that is where the romance quietly dies. This is the mechanism at the dead center of the whole business, so sit with it. A newly built facility does not fill up the way an apartment building does. It fills one unit at a time, slowly, and the industry has a polite phrase for how long that takes: lease up. In practice, a new facility takes roughly 18 to 36 months just to reach stable occupancy, and the fuller picture of revenue stabilization can run 3 to 4 years. Think about what that means with a loan attached. For years, you are making a full payment on a building that is a third full, then half full, then finally, if you're lucky and the market holds, actually earning. There's a floor to the bleeding at least. A new facility doesn't reach break-even on its operating cash flow until it's somewhere around 30% occupied, and I want to be honest about that figure because it's often quoted as if it were the finish line. It isn't. Break-even on operating cash flow is not the same as covering your debt, and it's certainly not the same as making a return. It just means the building has stopped losing money on its day-to-day before the bank gets paid. The real climb to the 85 or 90% the industry calls stabilized takes years. Full, in this business, never actually means full. But here's why people fight through those brutal early years, and here's the engine. Once a unit is occupied, something strange happens to the customer. They rented it for a move, a divorce, a death in the family, a garage they meant to clear out in 3 months. And then they don't leave. The numbers on this are quietly remarkable. The average length of stay actually climbed in recent years, from under 16 months to around 17 and a half. People rent for a season and stay for years. Now, I want to be careful here, because the tempting story is that customers stay because they love the service, and that's not it at all. They stay because leaving is a physical, emotional chore. Leaving means a truck, a free Saturday, and standing in a metal room deciding what to finally throw away, including the things that hurt to throw away. Against that friction, another month's rent is the path of least resistance, so they pay. There's a second trap, layered under the first. The longer they stay, the more the unit fills with the exact things that are hardest to part with, the boxes they can't quite bring themselves to open, the furniture with a dead relative's fingerprints on it. Each passing month raises the emotional cost of the reckoning, which means the customer who's been paying the longest is, perversely, the least likely to leave. Time doesn't loosen the grip. It tightens it. The business gets more secure. The older each tenancy gets the opposite of almost every other subscription on earth, where your longest tenured customers are the ones most likely to walk. And once they've stopped paying attention, the meter can be tuned in ways they'll never notice. One of the quieter tricks in the trade is the billing cycle itself. Bill a tenant every 28 days instead of once a month, and the calendar does something sneaky on your behalf. 13 billing cycles fit into a year instead of 12. The customer reads their rate as monthly. The operator collects it 13 times. Nobody circles it on a calendar. Nobody rents a truck over it. It's the purest expression of the whole model, revenue extracted not from a service performed, but from an attention that is quietly switched off. And because they'll pay, the operator can do something almost no other business can. They can raise the rent on the people already inside, again and again, and watch almost none of them walk. Moving in is easy. Moving out is the whole business. So you'd think the move is obvious. Build on the cheapest land you can find, keep the entry price down, let the margins do the rest. This is exactly where the smartest looking decision turns into the most expensive one. Cheap land is cheap for a reason. It's usually cheap because it's plentiful out where the zoning is loose and the fields are wide and plentiful. Cheap land is the one ingredient oversupply is made of. If you can buy an acre and build a facility there for next to nothing, so can the person who watched you do it. The barrier to entry that was supposed to protect you never existed. In the markets built on cheap open land, a competitor can put up an identical building a mile down the road in a single season, and the moment they do, the pricing power you were counting on evaporates. You saved money on the dirt and paid for it with your rates for the next 10 years. The land that looked like a bargain is the land that invites the war, and the reverse is the tell for where this business actually works. The facilities that hold their pricing for decades tend to sit on land. Nobody can easily replicate dense infill. Lots in built-out neighborhoods where there simply isn't a vacant acre next door for a rival to pounce on. The scarcity you want isn't scarcity of storage. It's scarcity of land to build more storage. That's the moat, and it's the one thing the cheap rural lot, by definition, can never give you. You weren't buying a discount. You were buying the absence of a wall between you and your next competitor. Now let's go underneath the sticker price entirely, to the costs that don't show up on any pro forma, the ones that escalate as you go. The first is the cost of running the machine at all. That business up top, the one that raises rents on captive customers and watches them stay, doesn't run itself. It runs on revenue management software, dynamic pricing, call centers. The whole apparatus the big operators have spent a decade building. The customer stays sticky only if the increases are calibrated. First raise a few months after move-in, then more every 6 to 12 months, each one small enough to sit under the threshold, where a tenant gets annoyed enough to rent a truck. Get that wrong, raise too hard, and you learn the second half of the sentence. There is a live and unsettled argument in the industry right now about whether aggressive rate increases quietly raise churn and erode the very income they were meant to grow. The mom-and-pop owner with a paper ledger isn't playing that game, he's just hoping people don't leave. That gap between the operator who prices like a scientist and the one who prices like a nervous landlord is quietly enormous. Two identical buildings on the same street can throw off completely different incomes purely because one owner knows exactly how hard to push each tenant, and the other is afraid to send the letter. The building isn't the asset. The skill of extraction is, and that skill is expensive to acquire and easy to underestimate from the outside. The second hidden cost is the one nobody puts in the brochure. What happens when a tenant stops paying? You can't just cut the lock and dump their things. Every state wraps that moment in a lien law, a strict sequence of notices and waiting periods and public advertisements before you can legally auction a stranger's possessions, and the clock runs anywhere from 30 to 90 days. Depending on where you are, miss a step, sell too soon, sell the wrong unit, and the liability lands on you. You are, structurally, in the business of occasionally selling people's belongings, and doing it wrong is its own category of expensive, and the recovery almost never covers the loss. By the time you've legally cleared a delinquent unit, you've eaten months of unpaid rent. The cost of advertising the sale, and the auction itself, usually clears for a fraction of what you were owed. The lien process isn't a way to get your money back. It's a way to get your unit back so you can rent the empty box to someone who will actually pay. The deadbeat tenant was never really the problem. The problem is that emptying his unit costs you months you had priced at zero. And the third, the one that dwarfs the other two, your entire profit rests on pricing power that a single stranger can break. Rates in this business are not fixed by you. They're set by the balance between how much storage a market wants and how much sits empty around you. When a market tips into oversupply, street rates simply fall, and they have, nationally, by around 3.5% in a recent year, with the worst damage clustered in the overbuilt Sunbelt cities where everyone rushed to build at once. You don't get a vote. One new building you didn't approve, in a market you don't control, and the number your whole model depends on drops out from under you. Let me show you what all of this looks like as 2 years in the life of the same building. In the good year, the facility is stabilized. It's sitting at that 85 to 90% occupancy the industry calls full. The units turn over slowly. The rate increases land quietly. And because there's almost nothing to spend money on, no inventory, no staff to speak of, no hot water, no kitchen, the income that survives after expenses is enormous by the standards of ordinary business. Net operating margins in the range of 40 to 60% are normal for a stabilized facility, which makes it one of the highest margin corners of commercial real estate that exists. The gate opens, the gate closes, and the money arrives. This is the version they sell you. Put rough numbers on it. A facility that reaches stabilized occupancy can keep well over half of its rental revenue as operating income because there's simply so little to spend it on. That's not a normal business margin. That's closer to a software company than a landlord, and it exists for one reason only: a full building with almost nothing left to serve. Now hold everything constant, the same building, the same owner, the same discipline, and change one thing. A competitor opens 2 miles away. Suddenly, the market is oversupplied, and to keep new units filling, you have to discount. Your street rates drift down with everyone else's. The customers you already have, you can still squeeze, but the empty units, the ones you were counting on to get from 70% to 90%, now fill slower and cheaper, or don't fill at all. Occupancy stalls in the low 70s. The mortgage does not stall. It arrives, in full, every month, indifferent to your occupancy. The exact same building, in the exact same hands, is now a slow leak instead of a fountain. The only variable that changed was one you had no control over: how much storage someone else decided to build near you. That gap between the 2 years, that's not a rounding error. That's the whole difference between the fortune and the ruin, and it turns almost entirely on things the owner doesn't get to decide. Which brings me to the part of this that isn't funny: the person who does everything right and loses anyway. Picture an operator who is not a fool. He studies the market. He picks a growing town, buys good dirt, builds clean, doesn't over-leverage, and manages tightly. By every measure of competence, he's done the work. And then, over the 18 months it takes his building to lease up, two other developers watching the same growth numbers he watched break ground within a few miles. All three buildings open into a market that could comfortably fill one. Now three owners are discounting against each other to grab the same tenants, and the street rate for the whole area sinks below what any of their loans assumed. Here's the cruel part. The big institutional operator across town can sit in that price war for years. They have the balance sheet, the software, and dozens of other facilities carrying the loss. Our careful owner has one building and one mortgage, and the very stretch of low rates he needs to survive is the stretch that starves him out. He didn't fail because he was careless. He failed because he was one player in a game where the other players had deeper pockets, and the barrier that was supposed to protect him was never there. The romance version calls that bad luck. The mechanism calls it the business working exactly as designed. And notice what actually did him in. Not a mistake, not a crash, not some exotic risk he failed to model. Just three reasonable people reading the same optimistic growth chart and each deciding, independently, to build. That's the signature failure of a business with no real barrier to entry. The danger isn't that you're wrong about the demand. You can be exactly right about the demand and still drown because everyone else was right about it too. And you all showed up in the same 18 months. The market didn't punish his judgment. It punished the fact that his good judgment wasn't rare. So here's the question that should be bothering you by now. If the entry is this treacherous, the lease-up this brutal, the pricing power this fragile, then why do the most sophisticated real estate investors on earth keep pouring money into this exact asset? Why does the smart money want the thing we just spent 20 minutes taking apart? Because they're not buying what you think they're buying. They are not buying a building. They're buying a subscription business that happens to wear the costume of real estate. Once a facility is full, the cost of serving each customer is almost nothing. No product to restock, no service to deliver, just a gate and a camera, so nearly every dollar of that sticky, endlessly raisable rent falls straight to the bottom line. And the demand doesn't die in a recession. Because the things that fill storage units, divorce, death, downsizing, a move gone sideways, don't stop happening when the economy turns. They arguably happen more. That's the quality the institutions are really paying for, and it's why the sector has been consolidating right in front of us. In recent years, the biggest operators have been swallowing each other. Whole One merger alone folded two national chains into a single portfolio of more than 3,500 facilities, all chasing the same prize. Scale over a business whose customers can't easily leave, and whose demand barely flinches when the economy does. Remember that clue from earlier, the giants controlling only a fifth of the market? Now read it the other way. It isn't that the professionals aren't interested. It's that there are still tens of thousands of amateur-owned buildings left for them to buy one bled-out owner at a time, at exactly the moment those owners can least afford to keep holding. I'll be honest about one tempting explanation, because it's the neat one, and it's mostly wrong. People assume storage is a tax shelter, the way ranch land is that the rich are parking money for some clever write-off. That's not really the engine here. The engine is simpler and colder than that. What the institution understands, and the first-time buyer doesn't, is that the building was never the asset. The captured decision is the asset. What you actually own is a room full of people who have quietly agreed to keep paying you, rather than face the small, annoying, faintly sad task of leaving. The steel box is just the cover charge. And the giants can afford to sit through the 3-year bleed to get to it, while the little owner drowns in exactly the years the big one shrugs off. Moving in was easy. Getting out is the product, and they own the exit. Which is why, when you go to sell, the whole story comes due at once. A storage facility isn't priced on what it costs to build. It's priced on the income it throws off, divided by whatever return the market demands that year. That has a brutal consequence. If your building is stabilized and full, there's a deep pool of buyers, regional operators, and the REITs who will pay a real price for a proven cash flow. If it's half empty and still fighting through lease-up, that pool nearly vanishes, because the thing that makes it valuable to settled, paying income, is the one thing you don't yet have. You'd be selling a promise, and promises trade at a discount. And the arithmetic of that discount is unforgiving, because value here is just income divided by a rate the market sets. Push that required return up a single point, and the price of the same building drops hard without you touching a brick. A facility throwing off $1 million a year is worth wildly different amounts, depending on whether buyers are demanding a 5% return or a 7%, and you don't get to choose which mood they're in the year you finally need to sell. Then there's how long it takes. This isn't a stock. You can't sell it on a Tuesday. A facility can sit on the market for months, sometimes past a year, while buyers underwrite every assumption you made. If you want to lift the price before you sell, your main lever is converting units to climate control, or adding them, and that only pays if the local rates justify the spend. And to know what any of it is even worth, you need comparable sales nearby to anchor the value, which in a thin market may barely exist. The same illiquidity that let you squeeze your tenants now squeezes you. The asset that was so good at not letting customers leave is, at exactly the wrong moment, just as good at not letting you leave. So where does that leave the postcard? Not in the trash. The dream is real. There genuinely is a version of this where a quiet, windowless box throws off some of the best margins in real estate, for an owner who almost never has to think about it. That part isn't a lie. It's just the last chapter of a story that opens with years of bleeding, and only the owners with enough capital, patience, and market luck to survive the opening ever reach it. So the honest answer to, is a self-storage facility a good business, is really another question. Can you survive the years before it becomes one? The margins at the end are real. The bleed at the start is just as real, and it is the filter that quietly decides whoever sees those margins at all. Buy it thinking you've bought income, and the first 3 years will correct you. Buy it knowing you've bought a slow, illiquid, capital-hungry option on other people's inertia, and at least you'll understand what you're holding while you wait for it to turn. The people who lose treat storage as passive income you buy. The people who win understand they're buying a captured decision and paying, in years and nerve, for the right to be the one who collects on it. You were never selling space. You were selling the privilege of not having to decide yet to people who will pay you for that privilege far longer than they ever meant to. Next time, we'll take that same X-ray to a business that looks even simpler from the road and hides an even stranger engine, the car wash and the membership you signed up for, forgot about, and are still paying for right now.